You're watching Special Report. Tonight, we're talking about UEFA's financial fair play scheme as the Champions League returns to our fixture list. Still with us in the studio, Ivan Gazidis and Christian Perslow. More from our guests very shortly. First, though, Michel Platini's new agenda already changing the way that football clubs approach their business strategy. But how will it affect the landscape as the new regulations really take hold? Here's our financial analyst, David Buick, with his vision of football's future.
In 2016, football will have been to hell and back. Football has been and will be in denial. And I'm afraid we will see something quite unlike what we have today. I suspect there'll be a European League of 24 clubs, of which I think the United Kingdom will contribute 6. There will be a huge downgrading of what we call the Premiership and the other leagues, where I hope salaries and increments are at sensible, sustainable levels. I would be very hopeful by 2021 that football would have recovered its soul and, more to the point, would be, frankly, in a position to run its financial affairs properly. That being the case, will probably coincide with the world's economy having recovered. I think people underestimate the incredible damage that the sovereign debt situation in the United States of America, Europe and the rest of the world has done to the world's economy. Within 10 years, we should be out of it. By that time, we will have still a very international flavour, but I hope that the Premiership will be reinstalled as the greatest league in the world, which it currently is today. Come 2031, i.e. in 20 years' time, well, the mind boggles where football might be. We'll probably be able to get to Tokyo by jet in 2 hours. So we'll have a world league with teams from Japan and from Australia, South Africa, and of course China, as well as Europe and South America. And the opportunities will be enormous. And by then, hopefully, the financial lessons will be learnt even more. Players, £1 million a year, and thank you, lucky stars.
Hey chaps, there's some room for optimism. By 2016, football will have been to hell and back. Do you share that view?
No, I don't. I'm very optimistic about the future of football. I think, especially the Premier League. I think the Premier League is on the precipice of a massive opportunity. And I think that what drives the Premier League and what drives the interest in the league is this local, domestic little competition that we have. The intensity of that, the fans, the way that we have travelling fans to games, and the interaction and the intensity of the atmosphere that we have. That appeals to people all around the world. So I think the future of the Premier League is very, very bright. I don't share any sense of pessimism about it.
Michel Platini says that what he wants to do by this financial fair play, Christian, is to level the playing field. Is that what's going to happen?
No, I don't think so. I think that's one of the great myths around this regulation. In fact, I don't think too much will change, even if these regulations kick in. These are regulations that essentially favour clubs with the highest levels of revenue and turnover. And by the way, listening to your expert, it's not a view I recognise in Premier League football today. Manchester United's results came out on Friday. Their revenues in all their key categories were up between 10 and 23%. Now, what I will say...
Is financial fair play good for teams like Manchester United?
Financial fair play is phenomenally good for teams like Manchester United because their turnover at well over £330 million today, if they break even, they can afford to spend £150 million on wages. If your turnover is £100 million and you need to break even, you can spend £50 million on wages. So the system is designed to force clubs to spend within their revenue limit, which favours clubs with big revenues. And as I say, in terms of the piece you ran, I don't think the commercial side of Premier League clubs has ever been stronger. And it's slightly embarrassing. I went into the sport from outside football, and certainly I can't think of any other industry today in late 2011 that could report the kind of results that Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool, and even City commercially are reporting right now. It's a measure of the underlying strength of the sport.
So UEFA have said they're going to try and enforce these rules. Of course they're going to try and enforce them. How likely is it that they're going to enforce them? Because there are exceptions and exemptions to these rules as well, aren't there?
There are exceptions, there are exemptions, there is a certain amount of discretion that will be in UEFA's hands. I'm pretty convinced that Michel Platini is committed to this path, but you know, we'll have to wait and see. I think, again, I rely less on UEFA for these things and more on the general sentiment of the clubs themselves.
How closely will you work with UEFA on moving this forward, and if things aren't working, try and change them?
Well, I don't think it's reasonable to think they're going to come out of the box perfect. So I think this will always be a work in progress, and we'll learn as we go along. There will be some unintended consequences. We'll need to adjust as we go. UEFA will need to recognise that as well, and I hope that they do. I do think they're serious about trying to enforce these rules. I certainly think people in the game want them to enforce them clearly and transparently. And I also think that the reason that the clubs generally, with various degrees of scepticism about how well UEFA will do it, but generally they're in favour of financial fair play, is because there are more winners than losers. And I think in that kind of environment, more clubs will benefit than will lose. I just want to mention one thing, Georgie. You know, we talk about financial fair play, and I think that's I don't like that term because it dresses this up as some kind of moral judgment, that there's a right way and an unfair way. And actually, there are just different systems, different ways of doing things. None of them are morally better than any other. The question for the game is, how do we want to develop the game? Where do we want to see it 5 and 10 years from now? And I think most clubs feel, they want to see more stability so that clubs can invest in their long-term futures rather than this spiral of simply spending on players without real investment in the infrastructure and in the relationship that we have with our fans.
Finally then, Christian, can you realistically see, when it does push comes to shove, a club like Manchester City, a club like Chelsea, a big spending club being slung out of the Champions League because they don't meet the criteria?
Well, I hope so, because Ivan is absolutely right. Everybody I speak to in the game thinks the general initiative to force clubs to run their businesses properly is good for all. And, you know, there are very big clubs that are appallingly run. There are very big clubs that deliberately lose money and believe that won't last. My view is it's pretty unlikely that a big club gets thrown out of a marquee tournament. But the good news is clubs are definitely trying to get their house in order. I'm
going to have to stop you there. My thanks to both of you, to Ivan and to Christian. We're back next week with a special report at 7:30. See you then.
Watch all 5 Sky Sports channels on your mobile and online